In HBO's The Gilded Age, Season 3, Episode 3, Mrs. Kirkland, played by Felicia Rashad, proudly mentions her nephew being the first Black man to graduate from Harvard. What she doesn't reveal, and what the show brilliantly captures through her character's obvious preference for lighter skin, is the tragic irony of what happened to that Harvard graduate's own family. The real man behind Mrs. Kirkland's reference was Richard Theodore Greener, Harvard's first Black graduate in 1870. But Mrs. Kirkland's elitist attitudes towards skin color weren't just fictional dramatic license. They reflect the very forces that would tear Richard's own family apart in real life. Richard Greener married Genevieve Ida Fleet in 1874, a woman with a light complexion from Washington, D.C.'s Black elite society. Together, they had 5 or 6 children, depending on which source you read. One of those children was a daughter named Belle Marion Greener, who was born in 1879. And I'll tell you more about her a little later. But the point of this story is that Richard's academic achievements and breakthrough at Harvard couldn't protect his family from the colorism that organizations like the Blue Vein Society had institutionalized throughout Black elite circles. In case you don't know what the Blue Vein Society is, to put it briefly, it was a bunch of loosely organized Black groups that started popping up in America right after slavery was abolished. They shared the thought that having a lighter complexion made them better than Black people with darker complexions. The same kind of thinking that Mrs. Kirkland has that I covered in a previous video. When Richard Greener was appointed as a U.S. diplomatic consul to Russia in 1898, he left his wife and children behind in New York. This separation would prove devastating. While Greener was serving his country overseas, his wife Genevieve made a calculated decision that would forever alter their family's trajectory. Genevieve and their children were light enough to pass for white, and she seized the opportunity. But their strategy was more sophisticated than simple racial passing. When Genevieve separated from Richard, she deliberately dropped the final R from their surname, changing it from Greener to Greene. Their daughter Belle, when she was an adult, adopted the middle name da Costa to craft an exotic persona that suggested Portuguese or Spanish heritage, explaining their slightly darker complexion without revealing their true racial identity. Rather than becoming simply white, Belle became an exotic puzzle. Friends believed that she was born abroad, perhaps in Portugal, and most thought she'd been raised in Virginia. This carefully constructed mystery allowed her to navigate white society while maintaining an air of foreign sophistication that made her racial ambiguity seem intriguing rather than suspicious. Belle DaCosta Greene, as she now called herself, used this mysterious new identity to achieve remarkable success. She became J.P. Morgan's personal librarian in 1905, managing one of the world's most prestigious private collections. At age 26, she was a confident young woman who brought both brilliance and beauty to the role, and she knew exactly how to use both. Belle was no dowdy librarian stereotype. She wore great plumed hats to auctions and famously declared, "Just because I'm a librarian doesn't mean I have to dress like one." Newspapers described her as a vivacious black-haired beauty who liked to keep her own affairs a mystery. Her flamboyant style and sharp wit made her a sensation in New York's high society. But Belle's success came at a bit of a personal cost. She completely severed all ties with her father, listing Richard Greener as deceased on passport applications throughout the 1910s, even though he was still alive. The Harvard pioneer who had broken barriers for Black advancement was effectively erased from his own daughter, who saw her Black heritage as an obstacle to overcome rather than a legacy to honor. As far as Belle's personal life was concerned, she was clearly someone who the white men of high society had their eyes on, and she seemed to be interested in some of them too. She had romantic relationships, but she vowed that she would never marry anyone. Her most well-known relationship was with a famous art historian named Bernard Berenson. Their relationship lasted for about 10 years, starting around 1908. The only problem with that was that Bernard had been married since 1900. And during the course of this affair with Belle, he remained with his wife, Mary. She just had to suck it up and suffer in silence as Belle and Bernard went on business trips. I wouldn't be surprised if Mary always had her suspicions about Belle DaCosta and her husband, but her suspicions were confirmed when Mary found Belle's letters to her husband. But Belle just wanted romance, not marriage. Bernard remained with his wife until she died in 1944. It seems that a key factor in Belle's commitment to never marrying was that a pregnancy might produce a child who looked more obviously Black and expose her secret. Some research even suggests that she got pregnant by Bernard and during one of their business trips made a quick stop in England to get an abortion. After all, she couldn't have one of these types of situations blowing her carefully crafted cover.
Look at your little girl, look at your little boy. You love them, don't you?
Yes, I do.
But you don't think they're yours.
Just everybody just kept on every time we were out somewhere, my family, they would just say that they're not, there's no way at all.
And what do the customers say?
All of them say, are they adopted? And I say, supposedly I'm their father.
Well, that's a shame. But the most scandalous rumors about Belle DaCosta surrounded her relationship with J.P. Morgan himself. Despite their age difference, he was 68 when he hired the 26-year-old Belle. There were persistent whispers that the financier and his young librarian had been lovers. When nosy inquirers asked Belle about it directly, she reportedly replied with her characteristic wit, "We tried." Well, that tantalizing response, which concealed more than it revealed, epitomized Belle's mastery of secrets. Here was a woman who may have been sleeping with one of the most powerful white men in America while hiding her Black identity from him and the entire world. When Morgan died in 1913, Belle continued working for his son, and in 1924 became the first director of the Pierpont Morgan Library when it became a public institution. Her 43-year career was built on maintaining one of the most elaborate deceptions in American history, transforming herself from the daughter of a Black civil rights pioneer into the mysterious mistress of America's cultural elite. Belle burned her 10-volume diary before her death in 1950, ensuring that her inner thoughts about living this double life would never be known. When Richard Greener died in obscurity in Chicago in 1922, Belle didn't attend his funeral. The first Black Harvard graduate's own daughter had become so invested in her fabricated identity that she couldn't even publicly acknowledge the man whose achievements had made her education and opportunities possible. This is the devastating reality behind Mrs. Kirkland's casual mention of her Harvard nephew. The same colorist values she represented in the Gilded Age literally destroyed families, turning children against their own parents in the relentless pursuit of proximity to whiteness and power. And apparently those same kind of attitudes are still destroying families today. I took a look at the comment section in that video, and some of the things that people are still dealing with today with family members regarding colorism are just frankly devastating. Richard Greener's story proves that even the highest achievements couldn't protect some Black families from the poison of colorism that the Blue Vein Society had spread throughout elite Black society. His own daughter's success was built on the complete rejection of everything he had worked to achieve, and possibly on sharing the bed of the very white elite who would have destroyed her father if they had known the truth. Possibly, but we'll never know. Now I'm going to share with you a few news articles from their time to give you a bit of a deeper glimpse into who these people really were. First, let me share this with you. It's an article about Richard after he graduated from Harvard. It's from an 1870 edition of the New National Era. And it simply says, Richard Theodore Greener, the first colored graduate from Harvard, still lingers, we believe, at his home in Boston. High hopes attached to this young man. Surely he ought to find, with little effort, a position where his admitted talents and acquirements can be made serviceable both to himself and his race. End quote. And I gotta say that almost every time he was written about from the 1870s until the 1890s, something about his race was a part of the story. And that would explain why his wife had no choice but to change her last name if she and her children were going to assume identities as white people. And speaking of his wife, let me share this story with you. It's about her, Genevieve, and Richard. This is 2 years after he graduated from Harvard and might have been one of the first times these two have been at a social gathering. It's from an 1872 edition of the National New Era, written by a correspondent who's on a tour of the East, specifically Newport, New York City, and Boston. And it reads, quote, "Socially, I had a fine time in Boston. During my 10 days sojourn, besides evening entertainments, I attended 2 picnics, at all of which I met the Washington belle, Miss Genevieve Fleet, who, if possible, shone with more than her ordinary brilliancy. At the more general gatherings, there were many handsome ladies, but female beauty is more scarce in Boston than in most of the southern cities." A few lines down, he writes of Richard, quote, "Mr. Richard T. Greener of Philadelphia. Besides many other places, we visited together Harvard University, of which he is a distinguished graduate, the Public Library, and the Athenaeum. Always a most genial and instructive companion, on these occasions he was almost indispensable, for the pleasure and profit of those visits would have been lost without him." Then in 1874, just 2 years later, the couple made news when the Washington Chronicle printed that they got their marriage license. And this is my favorite find of this whole little story that I put together today. And I hope that you like seeing it. It's a story about their daughter, Belle, or as she called herself, Belle DaCosta, when she went on to pass as a European. It's from a 1913 edition of the Stott and Courier. And what I like about it most is that it had a photo, or at least one of those like really realistic drawings of Belle in her youth. The beginning of it read, "No equal in America. J.P. Morgan's tribute. Miss Belle DaCosta Greene has great financiers' full confidence in all matters pertaining to art, especially in matters of rare books. Is Miss Belle DaCosta Greene the cleverest woman in the country?" End quote. Now, I won't read it all, but J.P. Morgan's answer to that question was a resounding yes. The article goes on to mention 2 of her biggest purchases were J.P. Morgan, saying that she has spent as much as $42,000 for a single book, buying in the interests of Mr. Morgan, who has implicit faith in her judgment. And it went on to say that she recently bought 11 books for a total of $80,000. At auctions, she will bid for hours with a coolness that astonishes the most experienced veterans. And those purchases were such a big deal that multiple stories were written about them. And then there is the ending of Richard. It's a story from 1922. And by this time in his life, only one of his daughters was in touch with him. And even she kept her distance. She would correspond by letters only. Richard was living alone, without a family, but with servants. And he was in decent health. Near 8 a.m. on May 2nd, he went to take his morning bath and had some sort of attack and died 30 minutes later. Now, this story I'm showing you is from the May 13th edition of the Chicago Defender, almost 2 weeks after he died. His death was published in earlier papers, but just in short 2 to 3 line blurbs. Not exactly the homecoming celebration that you might expect for a man who had lived his prime in the spotlight, being so well known for being a credit to his race, but also an all-around brilliant guy, regardless of his race. Richard died just a few years after Madam C.J. Walker. Her lack of education and her dark skin tone wouldn't allow her to run in some of the same circles as a family like the Greener family, but her income would. Madam Walker was the first Black millionaire, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. Her daughter couldn't pass for white, and she didn't try, but she did burn through a lot of her mother's fortune, after Madam C.J. Walker passed away. I made a video about her story, and you can see it here. I will also leave links to it in the description box and the pinned comment. Thank you for letting me be a part of your day. Subscribe for more stories like these. This video has been brought to you by me. Well, me and my new YouTube channel, Verified YouTube Guide. Are you just starting your YouTube journey and feeling overwhelmed? Don't worry, I've got you covered. My channel, Verified YouTube Guide, is your go-to resource for practical, step-by-step tips to grow and monetize your channel. It's literally follow-along video tutorials. I'm showing you the steps I took to get 180,000 subscribers on YouTube. So if you don't know how to do something, you can just copy my work one step at a time. From setting up your channel to showing you how you can earn money at any stage on YouTube. And I'm not just talking about YouTube ad revenue. If you have something important to say or a service to sell, start talking about it on YouTube now. Don't wait. Subscribe to Verified YouTube Guide today, and let's build your channel together. You don't have to figure this out alone. The link is in the description box. I'll see you there.